Well, as you know, we've talked a lot about UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, for years on this program. We've been warning about their links to terrorist activities. We've repeatedly brought this up. It's been raised in Parliament. It was raised, Julie Bishop reversed some $10 million of funding to UNRWA, thanks to this show and people like David Adler, Pauline Hanson, David Lyon-Hellman and others, Erica Betts. Now, more shocking developments as we've covered over the last couple of weeks. Well, someone who's taken the fight to the floor of Parliament is, of course, Senator Claire Chandler from Tasmania, and she was asking some terrific questions this week of DFAT and the funding of UNRWA. So, Claire, great to have you back on Outsiders as always. Thanks for the great job you do. Now, you were asking DFAT specifically about, and it's a little bit complicated, but my understanding is that 20% of the payment to UNRWA, based on normal compliance requirements, required them to check whether that money was going in any way towards terrorism. They didn't bother with that this time round. They just funneled through all the money, didn't even bother doing that, and only a few weeks later, October 7th, occurred. Is that a good summation? And then tell us what you were asking them in Parliament.
That's a very good summation, yes, Rowan. So this week in Senate estimates, I was asking questions of the Department of Foreign Affairs about the logistics of the contract that we have in place to fund UNRWA. And like you say, in prior years, 20% of that total $20 million payment has been withheld so that the department can do the compliance checks and make sure that UNRWA isn't undertaking, terrorist activity or anything like this. Now, we found out this week at estimates that those compliance checks didn't take place this year, that the department pushed the entire $20 million out the door in one fell swoop. And like you say, just a few weeks after that, we saw what was happening with the 7th of October terrorist attacks. Now, I think we need to be very clear here that not 1 cent of Australian taxpayer funding should be going to an organisation which has staff supporting Hamas or supporting terrorism. And we now know that that is the situation that UNRWA is in. So I think it's very disappointing that the government waived these contractual obligations this year, and particularly in light of what has happened since then, it's pretty disappointing.
James.
And I think we should note, Senator, that recently the Israeli forces blew up an UNRWA building that had a link down to a Hamas tunnel where there was all of the computer servers and they were being supplied with UNRWA electricity. But what was the answer that you got from DFAT about why they had decided to process this payment, to send these taxpayer funds to UNRWA, despite the check? And is there a ongoing issue where DFAT itself is institutionally biased in favour of Palestine?
Well, look, I think that's a very good question, James. I mean, the response from the department that I had when I asked why were these obligations raised, why didn't you withhold the 20% payment and undertake your checks and balances this year, was, well, the situation in Gaza was so dire, and we were satisfied that nothing was going to go too badly wrong, so we were happy to put the money out the door. Now, I think that's a pretty hard pill to swallow when you consider the fact that just a few weeks after that, we were in October 7 and the situation was unfolding in the Middle East as it currently was. So whether or not DFAT is captured to any one view, I certainly think that they should have been doing those checks and balances before they released the full $20 million to UNRWA this year. And like I say, the fact that the situation in the Middle East escalated so rapidly just a few weeks after proves that there is a very good and genuine reason why those checks and balances are built into the contract that the government has with them.
Claire, Hillel Neuer, who does great work for UN Watch, he's alleging that for 10 years they've been sending warnings to DFAT, as so has this program, so we can vouch for that. And he's accusing certain individuals at DFAT of shielding UNRWA, and he's actually accusing them of lying to you in some of their answers in the Senate. So we should keep an eye on that. But let's talk now, Claire, about something else that you've been such a strong politician on, and so many Australian girls in particular should be thanking you for is this whole transgender issue. We now learn that there's gender care for 3-year-olds at Melbourne's Royal Children's Hospital. Gender-affirming care for children as young as 3. What do you make of this, Claire?
Oh, I think it's absolutely crazy that this is happening in Australia, while everywhere else in the world, the ways in which children with gender dysphoria are being treated is under the microscope and being reviewed consistently. And in many instances, the gender affirming model, the model that by which a child's gender identity is affirmed rather than their biological sex, this model is being rolled back in other jurisdictions overseas because there have been independent reviews, there have been inquiries, and they have found that these models aren't necessarily providing the best possible outcomes to young children. So once again, I find it absolutely staggering that we are living in a country where, frankly, people have their heads in the sand about this. No one wants to be looking at this issue. No one wants to be talking about this issue. Whereas we know overseas, when there have been inquiries and there have been reviews, these affirmative care models aren't working.
Oh, it's crazy to have 3-year-olds involved in this. I think Australia is an outlier now with the rest of the world. The rest of the world's smartening up. I want to just ask you quickly about taxpayer dollars going to some characters who are doxing Jewish people, who are circulating lists of Jews, who are then getting all sorts of harassment and hate. And some of these characters responsible for the doxing, we find out, are the beneficiary of taxpayer-funded grants. Is that something that you're comfortable with?
Look, certainly if there is taxpayer money that's being spent on these events and these individuals, then like all expenditure of taxpayer funding, I think that should be reviewed and very carefully examined. But I think the broader issue here, and we've seen this playing out consistently over the last 4 or 5 months since the 7th of October attacks, is the way that certain elements of the left in this country are happy to reward people who are, undertaking or promoting, I should say, anti-Semitic views. In fact, I think it's arguably become trendy and popular within some elements of the left to have these views and to put them out on social media, and you see people getting rewarded for that. And I think that's a massive, massive problem. There is no place for anti-Semitism in this country, and we should be calling it out where we see it and not rewarding people for having those views to start with.
100%. Senator Claire Chandler, always great to chat to you. Thanks so much for coming on Outsiders and the great work you do in Parliament.